Hello, everybody. It's Mrs. Pound, and I'm back with more from Chapter 4.1 on water. And today's topic is going to be groundwater from Section 414. So, our objectives today are to describe the different zones and features of groundwater and to identify geological features formed by groundwater. Now, groundwater is really important, and it's all the water found underground. Here, water's coming to the surface in this hot spring, and you can see that it is producing a stream that is going off into the background. Groundwater is also very important to us because the water that you drink is groundwater. Whether you have your own well that has been drilled to access the groundwater, or whether you have city water, the city actually maintains wells that provide your water, or the town that you live in. So, all of our drinking water, for the most part, around here is, in fact, from groundwater. Now, there are a couple of zones for the groundwater. There's the zone of aeration. This is the underground region where pore spaces contain air and water. And that's labeled here as the unsaturated zone. But you can see air and aeration. And that zone is mostly air, but the materials are moist so that there is water provided to the plants here. There's also the zone of saturation. This is the underground region where pore spaces are saturated with groundwater. So down here at the bottom, all the pore spaces are filled in the rock. The water table is the boundary between unsaturated and saturated ground, and you saw that in the previous picture. You also can see in this picture here where the water table is, because wherever a stream or a pond or a lake or the ocean touch the earth, that is actually a boundary for the groundwater. And there's surface groundwater that's close to the surface, and there's also deeper groundwater. Now, for when we were talking about our wells, for our wells, we do not want the surface groundwater. We want the deeper groundwater because surface groundwater can be contaminated with many things. It's actually through that zone of aeration, actually filters out a lot of pollutants and different things from the water that could make it unsafe for us to drink. Water is stored in an aquifer, groundwater is. It's a permeable underground layer of rock. So this saturated zone is an aquifer, and that tends to be very porous rocks such as limestone or sandstone. And a lot of this depends on porosity, which is a measure of the open space in rocks. And so that's why limestone and sandstone tend to be more porous. You've probably noticed that sandstone will soak in some water. Other rocks, such as rocks made from clay or igneous rocks, are not porous at all. They will trap water. And so they will be at the bottom layer of an aquifer, and they will hold that a lot like a lake. Okay, so aquifers are basically underground lakes and rivers, and they do flow, but it can take decades for the water to move a very short distance, unlike on the surface of the earth. Water has a higher rate of permeability through gravel than through clay, as I was talking about earlier. So, depending on the particle size in the gravel, you saw had bigger pore spaces. Here, this clay has dried up, and you really cannot see any pore spaces there. And so, that tends to be very impermeable, and water cannot seep through that. And so, that will hold groundwater above it. Now, a couple of cool features that sometimes happen with groundwater are geysers. These are a hot spring that periodically erupts. Old Faithful in Yellowstone National Park. I don't know where this geyser is. I just thought it was kind of pretty. Um, but what happens is there is groundwater in these areas where there's magma close to the surface, these hot spots. And there's water in the rock, and the water will be heated up until it boils and steams, and then it will shoot out of the spring. And Old Faithful in Yellowstone does that about every hour. That's why it's called Old Faithful. Another feature that can be caused by groundwater are sinkholes. This is a hole in the ground that forms when an underground cave collapses. So groundwater can form these caves, especially in limestone, where it will dissolve the minerals. And you can tell that this is collapsed. Somebody didn't just dig this because look at this soil down here. So this something happened where the soil was removed, perhaps from groundwater, and that just collapsed under there. Um, And this just goes to show, I mean, this is areas also where water was stored during the flood that maybe it didn't go back in. And so there are caves underground as a result of that. So our objectives today were to describe the different zones and features of groundwater and to identify geological features formed by groundwater. So don't forget your 5 questions, and I'll be back with more about water.